Nazi war criminal. Scene 1. Time, April 1946. Place, Nuremberg, Germany. A man and woman are seated at a table. Both are in their 40s. The man is neatly attired in the black uniform of an SS officer. The woman is plainly attired in a house dress and sandals and appears haggard and disheveled. The woman gets up, stands in front of the table, and speaks directly to the audience.
My name is Ingrid Hope. I was married to that man. His name is Rudolf Hope. Rudolf was the commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp during World War II, and after the war was accused of committing some of the vilest crimes in history. Crimes that were so depraved, so wicked, so terrible, and on a scale so vast as to defy belief. In fact, there are some who believe to this day that the events which happened at Auschwitz never happened, are mere fabrications. Well, I will leave it to you to decide what really happened in that awful place. To hear Rudolf tell his interrogators from the International Military Tribunal what he did, how he did it, and why. And now Rudolf would like to tell you a little bit about himself.
Host gets up from his chair, walks around the table to center stage, and speaks directly to the audience.
My name is Rudolf Host. I was born in 1900 in Baden, Germany. I was the oldest of 3 children, the other 2 being girls. My parents were Catholic. I served in the German army during World War I, and after the war fought against the Bolsheviks so that Germany would not go communist. In 1922, I joined the Nazi Party, and in 1923 murdered a traitor. And afterwards, I spent 5 years in prison. In 1934, I joined the SS and moved up in the ranks until I was made commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp. I was commandant of Auschwitz from May 1, 1940, until December 1, 1943, and again from June to August 1944. My wife and 5 children lived with me at Auschwitz. What you'll hear today may make you angry, may upset you. But please keep in mind that in Germany, orders are everything, and I was just following mine. Thank you.
Host returns to his seat. End of scene 1. Scene 2. Time, April 1st, 1946. Place, an interrogation room in a prison. Host is seated at a table with 2 interrogators, Mr. Sendar Jari and Lieutenant Whitney Harris. Host is attired in a prison uniform. Jari is wearing a business suit and Harris is wearing a military uniform. As the scene opens, an interrogation is currently in progress.
So, Host, who else did you discuss the details of the extermination of Jews with?
I was not allowed to discuss this with anybody. It was a top secret matter.
Did Himmler give you orders about the construction of gas chambers?
No. He told me the following. That I was supposed to look at an extermination camp in Poland and eliminate from the construction of my camp the mistakes and inefficiency existing in Poland. I was supposed to show him plans of how I intended to construct my camp in a period of about 4 weeks. He told me that he could not give me the exact figures at the time, nor the numbers in which they'd arrived, but added that the figure would run into the several millions.
And what did you do?
He explained to me that the most important matter was that when an action was being carried on in one of these countries, it was not to be stopped or delayed because of inefficiencies at Auschwitz. He told me that the camps in Poland were not suitable for enlargement, and the reason why he had chosen Auschwitz was because of the fact that it had good railroad connections and could be enlarged and was removed enough from the centers of people, and it could be cut off from the connections with the country.
And did he tell you anything else? Did you go there immediately after your talk with him on your tour of inspection?
No, I returned to Auschwitz. He explained to me that it was not his habit to discuss such matters with inferiors. However, this case was so important and of such great significance that he had decided to explain to me his reasons, and they were as follows. He said to me that if the extermination of Jewry did not take place at this time, the German people would be eliminated by the Jews.
Did he explain to you how the Jews would be able to eliminate the German people?
He did not.
What other reasons did he give?
That was the reason. He had planned originally to dispatch a higher-ranking officer to Auschwitz to continue this extermination action, but reconsidered because he felt that it would only cause a friction between myself as the camp commandant and the higher-ranking officer in charge of the exterminations. Therefore, he gave me the orders in addition to that fact that I was supposed to treat this as a top-secret matter and not discuss it with anybody. All the instructions, such as procedure and orders I always received from the RSHA through Eichmann.
And then, before you went on your tour of inspection, you returned to Auschwitz.
Yes.
And what did you do there?
I immediately got in touch with the chief of construction and told them that I needed a large crematorium. I told them we were going to receive a large number of sick people, but I did not give him my real reason.
Yeah, and then?
And after we had completed our plans, I sent them to the Reichsführer. After I had changed them in accordance with the real purpose of his actions, they were approved.
Didn't you visit any of the other existing extermination camps?
I did.
Which ones?
Treblinka.
Oh, okay. What did you see there?
At that time, the action in connection with the Warsaw Ghetto was in progress. I watched the procedure.
And how was it done there?
They had chambers for about 200 people. Into these chambers, the fumes from an exhaust machine came in. Now, these motors had been taken from captured enemy equipment such as tanks, trucks, and had been installed right next to the chambers. They were run by gas, and those victims were supposed to be suffocated by the fumes.
How many chambers were there, and how many people were killed there?
I don't know the exact figure, but there may have been about 10 chambers. It was built next to a ramp, and the train drove right up to it. People were unloaded right into the chambers, and this procedure was necessary because the motor is often malfunctioning.
Weren't the people first registered or interrogated?
No.
They were put directly into the chambers from the trains.
Yes.
And what happened to their clothing?
They had to undress before they got into the chambers.
And their valuables?
Sorted. I saw a number of shacks in there in which there were piles of clothing, shoes, valuables, etc. All sorted separately and neatly stacked. They were layer packed.
And what happened to those things?
I don't know.
Well, who did the sorting?
Inmates.
And who guarded the trains on which the Jews were to be gassed alive?
The train that I saw in Treblinka arrived guarded by members of the security police. Also, the trains that came into my camp were also guarded by the security police.
Did the train loads consist of men, women, and children all together?
All together.
And we're talking now about the train in Treblinka.
Yes.
And there were babies, very small children, and very old people also, right?
All kinds. They were evacuated from Warsaw.
And you only saw one train in Treblinka while you were visiting there, correct?
Yes, just one.
And how many people were on that train?
One train generally handled about 2,000 people.
So when you say generally, do you mean that the trains in Auschwitz also had about 2,000 people?
Yeah. 2,000 on average. Some trains held 2,400, others held 1,500 and 1,800, but the average was 2,000.
Was this the first time you observed exterminations?
It was.
Now, I understand from your statement that the people, the men, women, and children, had to strip themselves naked. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the women carried their babies with them into the chambers?
Yeah.
And did they know what was going to happen to them there?
I assume so.
Did they know what was going to happen to them or not?
Yes, they did.
And what was your reaction?
I did not consider this a problem, or the means or the manner in which it was conducted, because in my opinion, they knew it was going to happen to them.
Okay, so you found it lawful and right that they were to be exterminated, but you only objected to the manner in which they were to be exterminated.
Exactly. According to my discussions with Himmler, it was the way you just stated.
Well, did anyone try to escape?
I didn't see that.
Okay, well, how long did you stay in Treblinka?
About 3 or 4 hours.
And did you discuss the matters with the camp commandant there?
I did.
And who was that?
I don't remember his name.
Well, how did you get into the camp in the first place? Did you have a pass or a permit?
I was introduced by Eichmann. They had been advised of my arrival by him.
And was Eichmann with you at the time?
No.
And did you see Eichmann in Berlin before you left?
Eichmann had been in Auschwitz in the meantime, and at that time I told him that I had to see this camp, and that he should advise him of my coming, otherwise I would not be able to get in.
So he had the authority to let anyone visit the camp?
No, he didn't.
So how did he get the orders to let you in there?
I assume that he already received instructions from the Reichsführer via Gruppenführer Muller.
While you were visiting, while he was visiting you in Auschwitz, you discussed the plans with him?
Mm-hmm.
So Eichmann knew what was going on.
He was.
And did he go with you to Treblinka?
No, he returned to Berlin.
And did he take the plans with him? So how did you send the plans to Himmler?
By courier?
Personally?
Yes, personally.
Now, you told me you didn't approve of the methods used in Treblinka, so you wanted to improve these methods. How are you going to do that?
I wanted to avoid in any case that the persons who came into Auschwitz should know ahead of time that they were going to be gassed.
And how are you going to do that?
At the beginning, I had to improvise because I didn't have the necessary buildings. So we installed signs, reading, to delousing, to disinfecting, to the bath, to the shower, etc. Now, in addition to that, inmates helped new arrivals with undressing and gave them instructions as to where they were to place their clothing so that they would find it upon their return. It was done in order to avoid exciting them in any way, or to give them an inkling of actually what was going to happen to them.
Oh, clever. But after they undressed, where did they go?
They went into these rooms.
Oh, what rooms were that?
Chambers. At first, they were two old farms before the crematoriums were built. They were made airproof. The windows were shut by cement and the airproof doors were constructed. Now, in every chamber, there was a small hole through which the gas could be blown in.
What kind of gas was used?
Cyclone B. It's a crystal-like substance.
From where did you receive these crystals?
Originally, the Cyclone B was used in order to gas a room and to exterminate insects. Since it was very poisonous and had to be treated with great care, we assumed it was the proper thing to use against humans.
Was it long before the human beings were killed by this gas?
Depending on weather, humidity, time of day, and the number of people in the chamber. Also, the gas was not always composed the exact same way and was not as effective every time.
Oh, of course. But generally speaking, how long did it take?
I saw it happen often enough. Generally, it took about 3 to 15 minutes. The effect varied. Wherever the gas was thrown into the chamber, the people standing right next to it were immediately anesthetized. It gradually spread out to the far corners of the room, and generally after about 5 minutes, one could no longer discern the human forms in the chamber. Now, everybody was dead after about 15 minutes, and the chambers were opened after half an hour, and not once was anybody alive.
How were you able to hear voices from the chambers if they were airproof, as you said before?
They were airtight. The walls were not too thick. They were only ordinary walls.
So what noises did you hear as you were standing outside?
At first, they'll scream, of course.
Did you have any observation windows?
In the chambers made up in the farmhouses, we did not, but later on in the concrete crematorium, we did.
Well, who delivered the gas to you?
I believe it was a gas company out of Hamburg.
And to whom were the shipments of gas addressed?
To the administration of the concentration camp Auschwitz.
And who paid them?
I don't know. I assume the administration paid for it. I'm sure they must have been paid.
When did you finish constructing the permanent gas chambers?
All four were finished in 1943, but we were already functioning in 1942.
Well, when in 1942 was the first one put into use? Wasn't it already operational maybe in November 1941?
No, it was 1942.
So these gas chambers, I mean the provincial gas chambers, were used from the summer of 1941 up until 1942.
November of 1942, right. But they were also used later on whenever the crematoriums were insufficient to handle the work.
Well, how big were the chambers in the crematorium?
They could accommodate 2,000.
Each?
Yes, each.
When the people arrived in Auschwitz, there was a railroad station in the camp already, wasn't there?
There was.
Were they unloaded, or were they marched? How did it work?
No, on this railroad station there was a sidetrack. Now the people stepped down from the train, discarded their baggage, and were examined by the doctors and sorted.
Well, who were these doctors? What kind of doctors did you use?
SS camp physicians.
And what principles did the doctors use to sort the prisoners?
According to the principles of whether they were fit to work or not.
Now, you say a trainload consisted of, on average, about 2,000 people. And how many doctors did you have assigned to check on each of these trainloads?
There were always 2 doctors.
And how many trains arrived daily?
Largest number of trains that ever arrived in one day were 5. This was in 1944, during the Hungarian action.
Yeah, but on average, how many arrived each day?
2.
So 4,000 people.
Yes.
And 2 doctors examined all those people?
Yes, they followed by them.
So it wasn't really an examination. I mean, they just took a glance at them.
Yes.
And according to which plan was the decision taken?
according to the order as to whether or not a man or a woman was strong and healthy.
Well, what about the children? I mean, did you just kill all the children indiscriminately?
That depended on their stature. Some of the 15 and 16-year-old children also went to work if they were strong enough.
Okay, so you're saying children under 15 were all exterminated,
Not all, but some, yes.
just because of Himmler's order,
Yes,
and because you thought they were dangerous to the German people.
yes.
So you thought a child of 3 or 4 was dangerous to the German people?
No, it wasn't quite that way. I should have elaborated perhaps a little more on my statement before of Himmler's explanation. He said that the German people would not have carried rights unless the Jewish people were now exterminated.
Well, I mean, so you're just saying the same thing you said before. The German people couldn't rise because of 4-year-old Jewish children.
Yes.
Okay. In general, what was the percentage of the number of people killed and the number of people that were used for labor?
It was between 20 and 30% that was set aside for labor.
And this was the percentage of women and men inclusively?
And there were always more men fit than women.
Of course. Just to take an example, when you received the Jews from Greece, how many of them were found fit for labor?
Well, the Greeks were very ill and arrived in a very bad condition, so that I believe the percentage was approximately 15%.
Let's talk about the procedure at Auschwitz again.
Okay.
The prisoners arrived. They were inspected by the SS doctors, and one row was marched into the camp, and they were the ones who were fit for labor. Is that correct so far?
Yes,
And the other row was marched into the farmhouses,
correct.
where they undressed.
Well, next to where they undressed in separate shacks next to the farmhouses. Later on, in inclement weather, other military barracks were used.
And then,
And they were separated according to sizes and marched into the groups into the chambers.
in groups of 200, right?
And the people who remained outside, could they hear what was going on inside the farmhouses?
No.
How many people could be accommodated in each farmhouse for the purpose of extermination?
Farmhouses accommodated in their various chambers one complete train trim all at once.
You told us that after a half an hour the doors were opened.
Yes.
And who removed the bodies?
A commander that worked there. It was primarily a commando of inmates.
And where did they take the bodies?
Now, behind the farmhouses were open pits, and the bodies were dumped into them and burned.
And who was in charge of the burning?
The same commander took care of all of these duties.
In the situation where 3 trains arrived on a day and the first train load was taken care of, was the second train set aside on a separate track until you removed every trace of the first train load?
Yes, two train loads could be taken care of at the same time. In the case the third train arrived too early, had to wait on the side track.
Well, who moved the bodies from the trains when they arrived? I mean, it's my understanding there were bodies on the trains when they arrived.
Well, that was another commando of inmates that took care of that work. The bodies would be put on a truck and thrown into the same very pits and burned as well.
Well, in general, how many of the prisoners arrived already dead?
That depends on where the train originally came from and how long they'd been on their way. In the case of the Greek Jews, they'd been over 10 days in transit and about 100 died on the way.
And what about the Hungarians?
There were more.
How many more?
Varied. Sometimes the trains were composed of different parts. Sometimes a hospital had to be put on the train. In that case, of course, there were many more dead than when the train load was from an agricultural region.
Do you know whether or not bodies were removed from the trains while they were still in transit?
I've never heard of that.
And the bodies, before they were thrown on the fires, was their clothing removed
Yes.
by your inmates?
Yes.
What happened to the gold from the mouths of the victims?
It was melted.
Yeah, I understand that, but was it removed before execution or after execution?
Well, they were removed from the bodies before they were taken to the pits to be burned.
And who did that? Who removed the gold?
They were among these inmates, dentists.
And who supervised their work?
The dental work was supervised by an SS dentist whose duty was to oversee that the work was done in a satisfactory manner.
When did the victims take off their jewelry, their rings, bracelets, earrings, and so on?
They took that off at the time when they got undressed, with the exception of rings, which they kept on before they went into the gas chambers. However, after they were removed.
I see. Well, just returning to the dental work, were there gold teeth pulled out?
Yes.
Did you ever get any complaints from the surrounding villages about the smell from the pits where these bodies were burned?
Well, when there was an eastern wind, the smell could be noticed across the Vistula.
And the Poles complained about this smell?
No, they didn't complain. It was only discussed among the population, but they didn't.
Well, this will be all for today.
Ingrid and two men enter the room.
Gentlemen, please don't hate my husband.
What we think about your husband is not important. What is important is that your husband be forthright with us, so we can determine his degree of culpability in the crimes we are investigating.
Well, I just ask that you treat him fairly.
We are treating him fairly, which is more than can be said for the way he treated his victims.
I was one of those Russian POWs. You received me at Auschwitz, and you tried to work me to death, but I survived. So that I can say to your face that what you did was wrong. And what's even worse is that you knew better. You knew that what you did was wrong, but you did it anyway. Outrageous!
I'm a Jew and you killed my entire family. For no reason other than we were Jewish. Like you, I was born and raised in Germany. I served the German army in World War I, paid my taxes. My children attended German public schools. We all spoke German. In fact, it was the only language we knew. My wife was even a high-ranking official in the Kaiser's government, yet that did nothing to stop you from murdering my entire family, leaving me with nothing! Nothing! What do you have to say about that?
Gentlemen, I was just following my orders.
Rudolph, what did you do?
End of scene 2. Scene 3. Time, April 2nd, 1946. Place, same room as in scene 2. As in the previous scene, Rudolph Host and Sendar Jari are seated at opposite sides of the table facing each other.
Mr. Host, returning to the subject of the selection of Jews for labor, where did the selection take place? In the building or outside?
Outside, as mentioned before when the train arrived.
That is, the Jews were marched past the two SS doctors.
Exactly.
So when a train with 2,000 people arrived, 2,000 people marched past two doctors, and the doctors nodded, this one to labor and this one to the plant.
Yes.
So, did you consider that a sufficient examination?
The doctor said that was sufficient.
Well, were they real high-class doctors?
Not all of them. There were a lot of doctors around.
I'm just saying they must have been very clever just to look at a person dressed and say, like, this one is good and this one is bad.
That is the way in which it was done, sir.
Have you ever been examined by a doctor for military duty?
Of course.
Did he just take a glance at you and then say you were okay?
No.
Well, what did he do to examine you?
I had to undress and was closely examined, my heart, lungs, other organs.
Well, didn't you think that the people that you were to employ in your war industries, that they should be perfect specimens of manhood, that they should be physically strong and able-bodied?
No, only of those who appeared at first glance to be strong and healthy were selected.
How long did a laborer last on an average?
Depended on where he worked, what he worked at.
How many hours a day did he work?
In an armament industry, about 10 hours. It also depended on the route of the march from the place of where they were housed, also whether they did outside or inside work, and whether they worked in subterranean room.
And how much food did such a worker receive?
Those who worked in permanent industries received a normal food ration from the economic office, and they also received an additional supply of bread.
Did they receive the same food as the guards?
No. The guards received military rations. Prisoners were fed civilian rations.
But you had so many prisoners that it didn't matter whether or not they survived.
No, that is not correct. I was reprimanded repeatedly by my superior authority, Commander Pole, who complained that not enough workers or men were fit for labor, were selected and used for labor purposes. He wanted more.
But on the other hand, Mueller and Eichmann were also complaining because you didn't execute enough prisoners, isn't that right?
That is right, that is correct. That was their exact opposition, the contrast.
Well, which point of view won?
Commander Pole won that. The armament industry needed so many men that it was made a duty of every camp, no matter where he was, to preserve as many laborers as possible for the industry.
But in Auschwitz, you still succeeded in exterminating quite a number of people. I mean, in the excess of millions, didn't you?
Yeah.
Well, how many millions?
I again refer back to the statement made to me by Eichmann in March or April 1944, when he had to go to report to the Reich Fuhrer that his officers had turned over 2.5 million to the camp.
To the Auschwitz area?
Yes,
Only in Auschwitz?
only in Auschwitz.
2.5 million?
Yes.
Aren't you a little confused right now?
No. The reasons why I remember 2.5 million is because he was repeatedly told to me that Auschwitz was to have exterminated 4 or 5 million, but it was not so. We had an order by the Reichsfuhrer of SS to destroy all materials and numbers immediately, and not to preserve any records of executions that were being carried out.
The 2.5 million that were delivered to Auschwitz, they were the people that were executed?
Executed and exterminated.
Then quite a number more were delivered to the camp of Auschwitz?
Yes. According to the percentage I had already mentioned, you would have had to add 20 to 30% that were used for labor.
Were these 2.5 million people gassed?
Yes, they were.
And what about the 500,000 people that were put to death by other means?
Well, there were those who died from diseases. There were those who perished by other sicknesses in the camp.
Didn't you know what was going on in Auschwitz up until the last moment, even after you had left your position as commandant?
Of course.
You were in the administration and economic office, weren't you?
Yes, I was. That is with the superior authority.
So, after you were commandant of Auschwitz, you were promoted to what position?
As chief of an amt, or department. In one of these departments, I was inspector of concentration camps.
And was that Amt 6?
Yes, that was also in the economic amt group D, and the economic and administration main office. That is amt group entitled Inspectorate of Concentration Camps.
The people who were to be gassed in the permanent plants, they undressed outside these large buildings, didn't they?
No, there was a special room.
Just a minute ago, didn't you say they were undressed in the outside?
No, the train was unloaded. They deposited their baggage, they were sorted out according to those fit for labor, and then the ones who had been selected marched away, and the others undressed in an undressing room.
What was told would happen to them there?
They were told they were going to be conditioned to take a bath and to be deloused and disinfected. Signs were there corresponding to these institutions.
They undressed and they put their things away just the same way you told us yesterday, as what happened in the farmhouses?
Correct.
And how many people could be cast at the same time in one of the chambers of a permanent plant?
In one chamber, 2,000.
A whole trainload.
Mm-hmm.
And how did the gassing take place?
It was all below ground. In the ceiling of these gas chambers, there were 3 or 4 openings that were fenced around with a grating that reached to the floor. And through these openings, gas was poured in.
And then what happened?
The same thing that I already told you happened in the farmhouses. Depended on the weather conditions, if it were dry and a lot of people were in the chambers, it went comparatively fast.
How long a time did the gassing take?
As I already stated, 3 to 5 to 15 minutes.
And how would you know when they were all dead?
There was an aperture through which one could go.
And did you hear any noises from the outside?
Yes, but only muffled. Because the walls were very thick cement, that it was almost impossible to hear anything.
After how long a time were the doors opened?
After about half an hour, as was the case, as I said before.
And who went in to remove the bodies?
They detailed prisoners who were working there. I might add that in the installations of the plants, electrical ventilators were added, which removed the gas fumes.
But it was still dangerous work for these inmates to go into the chambers and work among the bodies and the gas fumes, right?
No,
Did they carry gas masks?
they had some, but they did not need them, as nothing ever happened.
And then the bodies were removed to where?
Into the crematorium that was situated just above.
Did they have elevators?
Yes?
Where were the rings removed? Was it in the gas chamber?
No. There was an empty chamber just outside the gas chamber that was used where the rings were removed.
And that was where they pulled out the gold teeth?
It wasn't.
And how were the crematoriums arranged?
There were 4. The first 2 larger ones had 5 double furnaces, and they could burn 2,000 human beings in 12 hours.
What kind of fuel did you use?
Coke.
And the bodies were just shoved in?
There were little barrels as used in the crematoriums in towns, and the bodies were pushed up the opening and slid in.
And how many bodies could one oven take or hold?
The double furnace could take in 3 corpses at one time.
And how long did it take before the body was reduced to ash?
Difficult to say. When the fuel burning power of this furnace was still available, the process took place comparatively fast. But later on, after a lot of bodies had been burned, it was more slowly. But then it also depended on the body composition of the corpse.
What kind of bodies burned the fastest?
The heavy set fat persons.
Did you get any fat people in your camps? Or strong people like that?
I do not mean strong people, I mean fat people.
Were you often present at these executions and burnings?
I was.
Why?
Because I had to do this. It was my job to supervise these proceedings.
Why did you have to supervise these proceedings?
To see that everything was carried out in an orderly manner.
It was interesting, right?
No. Certainly not.
Well, why not? They were enemies of the German people who were executed, weren't they?
Yes, but the procedure was not one that such that one might take an interest in.
You told me yesterday that Himmler explained to you that every Jew, irrespective of sex or age, was a danger to the German people.
Yes.
So it must have been quite a satisfaction for you to see the danger of the German people removed so efficiently.
No.
You reported very often to Berlin, didn't you?
I never was in Berlin.
You never left Auschwitz after the execution started?
Not to report about these proceedings.
Well, tell me what you did report about.
I was called for a commander's meeting. I was called by my superior officer. And he did the questioning what they wanted to know from me, but I do not know today anymore what they wanted.
You remember in November 1942 you were at Eichmann's office and there was a meeting of experts and these experts were organized to come up with a solution to the Jewish question, right?
Eichmann and various leaders from the countries of Belgium and Hungary and so on, they were there, yes.
And what did Eichmann lecture about at that meeting?
He didn't lecture, it was the other way around. The various representatives of the different countries had to report on the conditions in their countries to Eichmann.
But this was in the presence of all the other participants of the meeting, correct?
Yes. It was more in the manner of a round table discussion. Every participant asked Eichmann what he was to do about difficulties that had come up. For instance, in France, it was asked what was to be done about difficulties that had come up with the railroad and the Wehrmacht, and so on. These questions were answered.
Wehrmacht. Well, what difficulties was there in connection with the Wehrmacht?
Mostly it was a question of transport and the Wehrmacht control of rail transportation. They did not always make rail stop available.
And what was Eichmann's answer to this problem?
He told them they should turn in their difficulties, that he knew them and that he knew they might request assistance there, and besides that, the people at that meeting had to disclose how many Jews they'd already evacuated, how many according to their estimate were still present, and that was also the reason why I had to be there.
And was the word "Entlassung" final solution used at this meeting?
Yes, that was Eichmann's expression.
And what did you take that expression to mean?
Extermination, as I already have explained to you.
Can you state absolutely, definitively what the word "Entlassung" final solution stood for?
I can only tell you what I understand by it, as I understood it from the Reichsführer.
And what did you understand it to mean?
It meant extermination
Extermination of whom?
of the Jews.
So the word or words final solution were used in this circle, which meant biological extermination of the Jews.
Yes,
And after this meeting, did you go back to Auschwitz?
I did.
And what was the next meeting you attended?
I never attended another meeting with him. With Eichmann.
In 1943, weren't you at a meeting in Berlin where Eichmann explained to the different ministries or representatives of them what Entlassung meant?
No.
Where he explained that Entlassung only meant sterilization and evacuation of the Jews?
No, I don't know.
Didn't you hear about such a meeting?
No, this is the first I've heard of it.
Oh, are you sure about that?
Yes. I only participated in one meeting with Eichmann. Never at any other time.
You were never at a meeting where representatives of the ministry were present?
No, never.
Why did you go to Budapest in May 1944?
Because I had received a commission by my superior Gruppenführer Glutz who had charged me to go there to find out how many Jews could still be expected for the armament industries that were to be started. They wanted to know how many they should count on for manpower.
And what did you find out?
First, after I received the commission, I got in touch with Gruppenführer Muller in Berlin in order to find out information from him because he was my superior authority.
Just a minute. That was the superior of Gluck's?
No, this has nothing to do with Gluck's. Okay? He was the superior authority for Eichmann.
Why did you go to Muller then?
Because Muller had to be informed by his expert, Eichmann, how many Jews could still be expected from Hungary.
And how would Eichmann know that?
Because he was the competent man charged with this question.
Well, why was he the competent authority? I mean, Germany wasn't Hungary, was it?
Yes, but he was in Hungary at this time.
And what did he do there?
He was in charge of all the evacuation, the entire evacuation of Jews.
What evacuation? Excuse me. There were no German Jews in Hungary, were there?
No Hungarian Jews.
Well, why would Germans be in charge of the evacuation of Hungarian Jews?
I don't know.
I mean, didn't that strike you as being unusual?
Happened in other countries too.
Yes, but Hungary was an ally of Germany.
I don't know the agreements that have been reached between the governments of these various countries.
But you did know there was an agreement between Hungary and Germany, didn't you?
Yes, because otherwise they could not have been evacuated.
Did you ever see such an agreement?
No,
Did Eichmann tell you about an agreement?
he did.
Where was that? In the hotel in Budapest?
No. I was never in any hotel in Budapest, but I was in his office at Schwammenberg in Budapest.
Well, where did you stay in
I
Budapest?
stayed with Eichmann in his house.
Well, let's go back to Berlin and talk about the Gruppenführer Muller. What kind of information did he give you?
He could not give me any information. He only told me that I should go to Budapest myself and get in touch with Eichmann and ask him about it.
So you went to Budapest.
Yes.
And when was that?
I can't give you the exact date.
Well, what month?
Spring 1944.
So when you saw Eichmann, what did he tell you?
He also could not give me the exact figure, but it was estimated about 2 million Jews were still in Hungary.
And all these 2 million Jews were to be sent to Auschwitz?
He said right away this estimate of 2 million was too high. Now, he didn't know how many exact were there, but he believed that the 2 million number was too much.
So he felt sorry that he couldn't get the 2 million, correct?
No, he merely said it wasn't correct.
How many did he expect to get from Hungary?
500,000.
For labor purposes?
No. You see, Eichmann had nothing to do with selecting those who were fit for labor or not. His office took no interest in this question at all.
So Eichmann's only interest in the Hungarian Jews was to import them to Auschwitz to exterminate them, wasn't it?
Yes.
So Eichmann couldn't give you any figures. Who gave you the figures?
Nobody could give me this information.
Who was present at your discussion with Eichmann?
So as far as I know, there was Eichmann, Hunch, and Brunner.
What about Wislency?
I met him later in Munga.
During your discussion with Eichmann in his office in Budapest, did you discuss the percentage of Jews who could be used for labor?
Yes. That was the very reason for my trip.
And how many persons did you estimate could be used from Hungary? I'm talking about the Jews, for purposes other than passing.
I didn't know that at the time. I found out later.
Well, I'm not talking about the number of Jews you were going to get for labor or any other purpose. I'm just talking about the percentage.
I can't get any picture of that.
But you were the man who had experience second to no other in the whole world as the percentage of Jews who could be used for labor, weren't you? You had been reviewing the Jews arriving in Auschwitz for years, and yesterday you mentioned a percentage of 20 to 30%, isn't that right?
Yes. But I also mentioned that it was different for each country.
Didn't you hope that you would be able to get around 20 or 25% for labor?
I hoped even more than that. I hope that in Hungary we should be at least able to use 35% for labor.
And did you mention that to Eichmann?
I did.
Well, how did he like it?
He said that he couldn't form an opinion because he had not seen them, so he couldn't make any estimate.
What was your reason to think 35% of Hungarian Jews could be used for labor?
Well, because for the large part, the Jews in Hungary were people from the farms, from agricultural districts.
So you were unable to get any definite information from Eichmann's office, so you decided to take a tour of the concentration camps and look at the Jews yourself, didn't
Yes.
you? And the first camp you went to was in Mungatz?
It was
And who was in charge there?
Mussolini.
Why was he there?
He was in charge of this whole area. That is section number 1 of Munda.
Can you explain to me how it was that a German SS Hauptsturmführer was in charge of collecting Hungarian Jews?
The actual collecting and imprisonment of the Hungarian Jews was not carried out by him. It was carried out by the Hungarian police and gendarmerie.
Well, then what was Ouspensky's job there?
So as far as I could find out, he was commissioned by Eichmann to determine that the collection and the gathering of the Jews were carried out in a proper manner.
What do you mean, a proper manner?
What I mean is that
Take your time.
proper manner was perhaps of two functions. To see that the Hungarian police stayed to the agreements that had been reached between the various governments, but I don't know what agreements there were and that all the Jews were collected.
Didn't Ouspensky have a Hungarian opposite number? Wasn't his name Ferenczy?
Yes, Ferenczy is the name I heard in Budapest. He was chief of the Hungarian field gendarmerie, but I don't know the name of Mussolini's opposite number.
How long did you stay in Honduras?
Just for one day.
And what activities did you do there?
Well, I went out to the brickyards that Jews had been collected and took about 1,000 Jews at random, and with the help of a Jewish doctor, selected those people whom he considered fit for labor in order to get an idea.
And how many were fit for labor?
About 30% in Mungats, but there were many brickyards in Mungats. In the vicinity of Mungats, also about 30%.
And then you went from one camp to another.
I did.
And was the average about 30%?
Yes, the average of the entire area of Mungats was 30%.
And this was Sector 1.
Yes. No, I'm not quite sure that I can say definitely whether this sector was called Sector 1 or Sector 1B. It was the Carpatho-Ukraine area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you traveled from sector to sector and continued your investigation.
No, I only traveled to the south in the neighborhood of the Danube River. That was another sector. I didn't know whether number 1 or number 1V, but it was in the southern sector and there was Danaker. Now, Commander Danaker was there in charge.
And what was the quality of Jews there?
It was less good because there were more people from the city.
And then you returned to Budapest.
Yes.
And who did you report to?
Eichmann's office. And then I immediately returned to Berlin.
Did you see Muller?
No.
Did you see any well-known faces in Budapest while you were outside your narrow circle of collaborators?
I only went together with Eichmann to the Obergruppenführer Winkelmann, higher SS and police leader, because I had to report to him anyhow.
Did you see Kaltenbrunner there?
No,
Did you hear that Kaltenbrunner was in Budapest?
not when I was there.
All right, we're finished now. We'll continue the hearing later on.
End of scene 3.